What if I showed you this photo and I said that this was not at all one of the most interesting moments on this day's play? It's both true and baffling. Tongue has a foot off the pitch. I'm not even sure this was the weirdest shot he played. And yet this photo tells you almost nothing of what happened today. It was one of the most exciting, controversial, crazy and baffling days of Test cricket in memory, and also maybe the loudest mob I've ever heard at Lord's. Yet it started by Australia actually letting England knock the ball around quite easily. They didn't go all in with the short ball, but they didn't really commit to line and length either. It looked like that might change when Stark got the ball to reverse and almost broke Stokes' foot, and I suppose England's hearts. But Stokes hit it, and so he hobbled on. Then Duckett was out to a short one, which is probably the least surprising thing to happen in this match. This looked like a very standard dismissal, right? Just a caught behind. But there is, of course, something slightly weirder going on here. Have a look where Alex Carey is standing before the ball. He's already down the leg side. And I can tell you that there was also already 2 other fielders down the leg side, meaning that Australia had 3 behind square when this ball was bowled, which of course means that it should be a no ball. Except that law doesn't actually count wicket keepers. As long as the wicket keeper is in a position to take the ball as a keeper, they can stand on the offside or the leg side and not be counted as a normal fielder. And it also goes on to say that in the leg side limits section. It allows the keeper to stand in this position without it being considered another fielder behind square. Clearly, Alex Carey really knows his laws. And of course, this may not have been the only time that he proved that. You may have heard of the other one though. In fact, the second and more important one, I suppose, it started so simple. Another bouncer, another duck from Bairstow, and Carey just takes the ball. Just a normal, everyday moment of Lord's cricket. Except that Carey didn't keep the ball or throw it to another fielder. Instead, he threw the ball at the stumps, and Jonny Bairstow left the crease as the ball was in the air. According to my basic timings on this, from the moment the ball was safely in his hand until he threw it, it was less than a second. It would be really super duper rare for an umpire to call over that early at any stage. And why did Carey throw it so quick? And even before Bairstow had left the crease? That is because the Australians had seen him leaving the crease over and over and over again. In fact, as someone who's watched pretty much his entire career, Bairstow has always done this. He loves to chat to the non-striker and have a bit of a garden. The Aussies saw him doing that even more than usual. They waited and they ran him out. However, we obviously have to check some other things here. Like, what were the umpires doing? The square leg umpire actually does start to walk in, although it's very important to note that this has absolutely nothing to do on whether that ball is dead or live. Nor does it matter if he is watching. In fact, in these kinds of dismissals, it's really rare for the umpire to be looking, because who was expecting this? Certainly not the umpire or Jonny Bairstow. So what about the main umpire? Well, he does not move from his spot. However, he does reach to maybe put his counters away or grab the hat. So does that make this ball dead? No. The things that would make this ball dead would have been if Carey had thrown it to another fielder or had kept it in his hand for a long period of time. Of course, the thing that would have made this ball the most dead would have simply been if the umpire had called over. Jonny Bairstow cannot call over, and he cannot be out of his crease during a live ball without the chance of being run out or stumped. They do not paint those lines on the ground accidentally. You will hear arguments about how he was not looking for an advantage. He wasn't. But if I play a shot and my foot drags out and I don't notice, I'm not taking any advantage. I'm probably not even looking for a run. I am simply out of my crease. And if the opposition works that out when the ball is still live, you can be dismissed. When we started painting those 2 lines there, the batter's job was to stay within them as much as possible when the ball was live. Then, of course, there is the cheating or spirit of cricket side of things. Australia did not cheat. There are actually ways here that Carey could have cheated. Like he could have pretended that he missed or fumbled the ball, or he could have gone through the motions of changing ends and then gone for a throw. But mechanically, this was actually a fairly simple stumping. The keeper had the ball in his glove, he thought the batter was going to leave, so he threw the ball down and dislodged the bails, and the batter was out of his ground. Of course, the next argument is, what about the spirit of cricket? Well, obviously, I don't believe in it. Largely because it's a nebulous concept that changes location by location, and no one ever agrees on it anyway. But there are certainly players who would not have tried this run out, and others who would have, but then rescinded their appeal. And I think that's perfectly fine. Everyone lives to their own moral code. Like, for instance, here is Murali celebrating a Kumar Sangakkara 100 a little bit too early, and the keeper taking the bails off. Wait a minute, who is that keeper? Oh, it's Brendan McCullum, current England coach. This happened in 2006, and right after McCullum apologised for what he did. And by right after, I mean he did it in 2016. But it actually gets funnier, because this was not the only time that McCullum did this. In 2005, he ran out Chris Mapofu when he was celebrating his teammate's first 50. And weirdly enough, as far as I can tell, there was no apology there at all. But all of this gets more hilarious when you factor in what I said before. It was less than a second. but we actually measured how long it took Carey to throw the ball, and it was 0.87 of a second. 87. The devil number in Australian cricket. Beelzebub behind the stumps. And I have another one for you. And no, it's not the person who compared my tweet about the laws of cricket to those who followed the Nazis and apartheid. But that's how quickly this went in that direction. And it's not even pointing out that less than 24 hours earlier, the Australians were moaning over Mitchell Starc clearly running the ball along the ground and voiding, to use a Stuart Clark term, his catch. No, this funny thing is Matt Renshaw. This is him at short leg, facing the square leg umpire. And this is him appealing to a ghost at square leg. And this is him finally appealing to the square leg umpire. And if you think, well, Jarrod's an Australian, of course he feels this way about this particular dismissal. There's a couple of things to remember here. I fundamentally believe in the laws of cricket far more than I ever have the Constitution of Australia. And in the press box, I happen to be sitting next to a man called Fraser Stewart. Fraser Stewart is basically the boss of the MCC cricket laws. He agreed with me, and he's English, and I once got him out once in a club game. And of course, none of this will be stopped with discussions on laws because most people don't even know the laws of cricket. And what happened next was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen happen at Lords. They got loud and angry. And Lords does tutting, perhaps the odd clearing of its throat aggressively. But it is not like most cricket crowds. But this issue changed it. Of course, this was not quite a normal Lords crowd. These were the cheap seats, 25 quid a day, which to most other parts of the world is not actually cheap. But anyway, it was cheap for Lords. And so that meant the audience here was a bit more like a normal cricket crowd and not so much like Lords. I've seen that here before, of course, like when there was a day 5 when Sachin Tendulkar was coming into bat and a whole new different kind of crowd turned up. Today was a lot more like that. But at the same time, we are still at Lords and the crowd were chanting, same old Aussies, always cheating. In 15 years of coming to this ground, I've never seen anything like that at Lords before. And the chant wasn't the only funny thing that anyone heard. Cricket's greatest ever troll, Stuart Broad, said to Alex Carey, "That's all you'll ever be remembered for." That is perhaps the best work the Nighthawk of nonsense has ever come up with. And after this, he was still trolling the Aussies out on the field by exaggeratingly staying in his crease after the end of each over. I, for one, will be waiting to see some Alex Carey is a shit bloke t-shirts when we get to Jonny Bairstow's home ground next week. But of course there was actual cricket being played, and this is when Stokes went off. And a lot of people were suggesting it was the stumping, and maybe it was. But it was probably only his real chance of getting England close. It was a big chase and they were a long way behind. And he was quite literally throwing his bat at the ball. But he was doing that in such a smart way. Like, for instance, he wasn't attacking from both ends. It was hard to tell exactly what his issue was. The boundary might have been slightly smaller on one side. There was certainly a breeze going in that direction as well. But it also could have been that the pitch was a little bit more consistent with its bounce at one end than it was at the other. And of course, the narrative in these situations is always that Ben Stokes is a big game player. But there is something else about his batting that almost never gets pointed out. His ability to pare back his game when the pitch or the mat situation is tough is unlike anyone I have ever seen in Test cricket, or one-day cricket, or even T20 cricket. Think about the bunting of the full toss in the last ball of the 2019 World Cup final here. Think about the way he milked the field in the 2022 final in T20. What about blocking Lyon for hours on end at Headingley? When the pitch and match situation is weird, his ability to shed all the parts of his game that don't matter and become a singular batting machine is absolutely incredible. He only seems to have 3 gears, right? Dead batting for a draw, ODI middle overs accumulation, and T20 death hitting. Most of the batters on this list have 5 or 6 gears available to them, and they slowly ramp up or move down based on how the game is being played. Stokes is fairly ordinary in a normal Test innings. That's why his career average is so low. But when the choices are minimised for him by the pitch or the match situation, all the normal things that quite often get him out just disappear. He blocks, he finds singles, or he slogs. And suddenly he's the best player in the world. All 3 of his gears are perfect for a moment like today. And yes, he clearly had luck. Steve Smith dropped probably the easiest chance of the 3, and the other 2 were a lot harder. But even so, Australia did create 3 chances against Stokes, and yet they spent most of their time absolutely fearing him. It's also weird that Australia made all those chances, because you'd have to say if you were watching this, it looked like they didn't handle Stokes all that well. They just hoped he would eventually hit the ball straight up in the air. Like, for instance, they didn't risk an early over of Heads part-time off spin when he would have been spinning the ball away from the boundary that Stokes wanted to hit to. It took them forever to finally try bowling wide of the stump to Stokes at the hitty end. They didn't bring the fields in when he wasn't going after the bowling from the other end. They didn't try length balls against Broad either. They just sat back and waited as Stokes slammed some incredible shots into the crowd. In fact, their best chance was when Broad once ran 2 on a ball and Stokes ran none. But eventually it was Stokes who made the mistake. He attacked from the wrong end. He gave up his own plan. And when that ball went up in the air, that time it was finally caught. Remember that this was one of the greatest test innings ever, and yet not even Ben Stokes' best knock in test match cricket. Hell, depending on how you feel, you could also argue it was not even his best innings at Lord's. But there was more entertainment afterwards as England's tail did things like Anderson charging into a bouncer head first and all these tongue shots. But the game was pretty much over once Stokes was out. But England have been in both tests, and they certainly had chance of winning them both. In fact, the chances of losing both games is pretty slim considering the level of cricket they've played. I mean, you'd have to say they've played pretty much as good as Australia at times, and yet they're 2-0 down. And they could still win a couple of tests from here, though 3 feels very unlikely. Although, who is to say what they are saying in the dressing room right now? Maybe they feel like they won this one as well. But more important is the fact that these have been the most amazing Ashes tests. We've already had one nail-biter and a Stokes classic. Enough controversy to keep all the chins wagging for another few days, and Alex Carey just wrote 8% of his biography in an afternoon. In many ways, this match started with the keeper doing an extraordinary thing, and ended with the keeper doing an extraordinary thing. I mean, this match was so exciting that Lord's, of all places, became an angry mob. You would have to say that Lord's 2023 is certainly a test to keep.